Welcome to my channel, Akib Storyteller. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet evening hour with me. Before we begin tonight's story, I want you to know that you're in a safe space, a peaceful space, where nothing demands your attention except the gentle rhythm of my voice and the comforting tale I'm about to share with you. Find yourself a comfortable position now. Whether you're lying in bed, nestled under soft blankets, or settling into your favorite chair, allow your body to sink deeper into whatever surface is supporting you. There's nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. This time is yours, and yours alone. Let's begin by taking a deep breath together. Breathe in slowly through your nose, filling your lungs completely. And now release that breath through your mouth, letting go of any tension you've been carrying. Again, breathe in deeply, feeling your chest and belly expand, and exhale fully, releasing the day behind you. One more time, drawing in calm and peace with your breath, and releasing any worries or thoughts that no longer serve you. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story about a place where books hold secrets, where quiet mysteries unfold in the most peaceful way, and where one dedicated librarian discovers that sometimes the most extraordinary things hide in the most ordinary places. This is the story of Eleanor Wright and the midnight messages she found in the Willowbrook Public Library. Our tale takes place in a small town nestled in a valley where autumn seems to linger longer than anywhere else. The leaves turn golden and red, but fall slowly, reluctantly, as if they're savoring every moment on the branches before drifting to the ground. Willowbrook is the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where the local cafe serves the same apple pie recipe that's been passed down for 3 generations, and where the library sits at the heart of everything. A beautiful old building made of warm red brick and tall arched windows. Eleanor Wright has been the head librarian at Willowbrook Public Library for 15 years. She's a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked brown hair that she usually wears in a loose bun, wire-rimmed glasses that are perpetually sliding down her nose, and a collection of cardigans in every color imaginable. Her favorite is a deep burgundy one with wooden buttons, worn soft from years of wear. Eleanor lives alone in a small cottage 3 blocks from the library, shares her space with 2 cats named Dickens and Austin, and considers books to be her closest companions and dearest friends. The library itself is a magnificent building, though modest by city standards. It was built in 1928 by a wealthy mill owner who believed that every town deserved a temple of knowledge. The main reading room features high ceilings with exposed wooden beams, tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light, and row upon row of dark wooden shelves filled with books. The smell of old paper, leather bindings, and furniture polish creates a scent that Eleanor finds more comforting than any perfume. There's a children's section with colorful bean bags and cheerful murals, a reference area with long oak tables perfect for studying, and Eleanor's favorite spot, a small alcove near the back with a single armchair and a reading lamp, where she takes her lunch break with whatever book has caught her attention that week. Eleanor's days follow a comfortable rhythm. She arrives each morning at 8:30, unlocks the heavy front doors with their brass handles worn smooth by decades of hands, and turns on the lights one section at a time. She checks the book return slot, processes the items that came back overnight, and has everything ready before the library opens at 9. Throughout the day, she helps patrons find books, answers reference questions, manages the computer stations, and hosts a story time for toddlers every Tuesday and Thursday at 10. She knows most of her regular visitors by name, knows their reading preferences, and takes quiet pride in matching the right book to the right person. But it was on a Tuesday evening in late October when Eleanor's ordinary life took a turn toward the extraordinary. She was working late, as she often did on Tuesday evenings, processing a large donation of books from the estate of a recently deceased local teacher. The library had closed at 8, and she'd locked the doors, enjoying the peaceful quiet of having the entire building to herself. The only sounds were the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the occasional creak of the building settling, and the soft whisper of pages as she examined each donated book. Around 9:30, she wheeled the return cart out from behind the circulation desk to shelve the day's returned items before heading home. This was her favorite task, actually, a sort of meditation. She knew the library's organization system so intimately that she could shelve books almost without thinking, letting her mind wander as her hands worked. She was humming softly to herself, an old melody her mother used to sing when she pulled out a worn paperback copy of Agatha Christie's. And then there were none. As Eleanor opened the book to check its condition before reshelving it, a small piece of paper fluttered out and landed at her feet. She bent to pick it up, assuming it was a receipt or bookmark that someone had left behind. But when she unfolded the paper, she found something unexpected. In neat, careful handwriting, someone had written, "The answer you seek is hidden where the roses bloom eternal." Eleanor stood there in the middle of the fiction aisle, holding this small slip of paper. Her curiosity immediately piqued. It wasn't the first time someone had left a note in a library book. Over the years, she'd found shopping lists, love letters, children's drawings, and once, a very detailed recipe for chocolate chip cookies that she'd actually tried and found delicious. But there was something different about this note. The handwriting was elegant, almost old-fashioned, and the message itself seemed deliberately cryptic, like a clue to a puzzle. She looked at the book's checkout history on her computer, and then there were none had been checked out 6 times in the past 3 months, which was unusual for a book that had been in their collection for years. She recognized a few of the names. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived in the Victorian house on Elm Street and who read exclusively mysteries. Daniel Oakes, a high school English teacher who often borrowed classic literature. Sarah Chen, a graduate student who was home for the semester and seemed to be working her way through the entire mystery section. And 3 names she didn't immediately recognize. Eleanor sat down at her desk, the note still in her hand, and read it again. The answer you seek is hidden where the roses bloom eternal. What answer? Whose answer? And where exactly did roses bloom eternal? In Willowbrook, roses certainly didn't bloom eternally. They bloomed beautifully in summer, but surrendered to frost by late October, just like everywhere else. She should probably just throw the note away, she thought. It was likely nothing, perhaps part of a game between friends, or a creative writing exercise someone had forgotten about. But Eleanor had been a librarian long enough to know that books often held secrets, and mysteries, even small ones, were meant to be solved. She carefully tucked the note into her cardigan pocket and continued with her shelving, but her mind kept returning to those elegant words. The next morning, Wednesday, Eleanor arrived at the library with a renewed sense of purpose. She'd barely slept, her mind turning over the mystery of the note. During her morning routine, she found herself paying closer attention to the returned books, wondering if she might find another message. But the morning's returns yielded nothing unusual, just the typical collection of bestsellers, children's picture books, and audiobooks. It wasn't until that afternoon, while she was shelving in the biography section, that she found the second note. This one fell from a thick biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor unfolded the paper with eager fingers and read, "When the moon is full, count the stones from the angel's feet." Her heart beat a little faster. 2 notes in 2 days. This was no coincidence. Someone was deliberately leaving messages in library books, cryptic clues that seemed to point toward something, though Eleanor couldn't yet imagine what. She checked the circulation history of the Eleanor Roosevelt biography and found that it had been checked out only twice in recent months. One of those names was Sarah Chen again, the graduate student. The other was a name Eleanor didn't recognize at all, M. Blackwood. Eleanor sat at her desk during her lunch break, eating her usual turkey sandwich without really tasting it, 2 notes spread before her. She pulled out a notebook and began to write down everything she knew. 2 notes, different books, different genres. One name appeared on both checkout lists, Sarah Chen. But Sarah had been in the library just last week, and she seemed like such a straightforward young woman, always polite, always returning her books on time. Could she be the mysterious note writer? The library was quiet that afternoon. Just a few regulars browsing the stacks, and 2 teenagers working on homework at the study tables. Eleanor found herself watching the patrons more carefully than usual, wondering if one of them might be her mysterious correspondent. Around 3 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson came in, moving slowly with her carved wooden cane, heading straight for the mystery section, as always. Eleanor approached her with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Patterson. Looking for your next mystery?" The elderly woman looked up, her eyes bright behind thick glasses. "Oh, yes, dear. I've just finished the most delightful Agatha Christie. And then there were none. Have you read it?" Eleanor's pulse quickened. "I have, actually. It's a classic. Did you enjoy it?" "Immensely," Mrs. Patterson said. "Though I must say, I found more than just the story interesting. Someone had left the most curious note inside. I almost threw it away, but then I thought, perhaps it's meant for someone specific. So I left it where I found it." Eleanor tried to keep her voice casual. "A note? How intriguing. What did it say?" Mrs. Patterson's expression grew thoughtful. "Something about roses blooming eternal. Quite poetic, really. It made me think of the rose garden at Evergreen Cemetery, you know. The founding families planted it in the 1800s, and it still blooms every summer. As eternal as roses can be, I suppose." They chatted for a few more minutes, and Eleanor helped Mrs. Patterson select her next mystery, but her mind was racing. Evergreen Cemetery. Of course. It was one of the oldest places in Willowbrook, a peaceful spot on a hill overlooking the town, with elaborate Victorian monuments, and yes, a historic rose garden that was maintained by volunteers and considered a point of local pride. But what was the connection? And what answer was supposedly hidden there? Eleanor realized she needed to find more notes before she could piece this puzzle together. She also needed to be more strategic about checking the returned books. Over the next week, Eleanor became a woman on a mission. She checked every single returned book carefully, shaking them gently, fanning through their pages. Her diligence paid off. By the following Tuesday, she'd found 3 more notes. The third note, discovered in a gardening book about perennial flowers, read, "3 generations watched, but only one understood." The fourth note, tucked into a local history book about Willowbrook's founding families, said, "The secret sleeps beneath the marble lamb." The fifth note, found in a collection of poetry by Robert Frost, contained just 4 words. Midnight reveals the truth. Eleanor spread all 5 notes across her desk in the privacy of her small office. Her notebook was filling with observations, theories, and questions. The notes definitely seemed to be pointing toward Evergreen Cemetery. The roses, the stones from the angel's feet, the marble lamb. All of these were elements you'd find in a cemetery. And Mrs. Patterson's comment about the founding families planted another seed. 3 generations watched, but only one understood. That sounded like it referred to a family plot. Eleanor had lived in Willowbrook her entire life. She knew the cemetery well enough. She'd attended funerals there, walked through it on peaceful spring afternoons, even done some genealogical research there years ago for a patron. But she'd never paid particular attention to the specific monuments. That evening, after the library closed, Eleanor did something she'd never done before in all her years as a librarian. She accessed the checkout records for all 5 books that had contained notes and cross-referenced the names. Only one name appeared on every single list: Sarah Chen. Eleanor sat back in her chair, processing this information. Sarah Chen was leaving the notes. But why? Was she trying to communicate something? Was this some kind of elaborate game or art project? Eleanor pulled up Sarah's library card information. She was 26 years old, a graduate student in history at the State University, currently taking a semester off and living with her grandmother on Maple Street. Her checkout history showed a voracious appetite for reading. Mysteries, histories, biographies, poetry, gardening books, novels both classic and contemporary. Eleanor made a decision. She would find Sarah and ask her directly about the notes. But first, she wanted to visit Evergreen Cemetery herself to see if she could unravel any part of this mystery on her own. The following Saturday was overcast and cool, perfect weather for a cemetery visit. Eleanor drove her old sedan up the winding road to Evergreen Cemetery just after lunch. The cemetery gates were always open during daylight hours, and she parked in the small gravel lot near the entrance. She'd brought her notebook, a camera, and a thermos of tea, prepared to spend as much time as needed. The cemetery was beautifully maintained, even in late autumn. Fallen leaves had been raked into neat piles, the grass was trim, and the monuments stood in various states of weathered grandeur. Some were simple headstones, just names and dates. Others were elaborate affairs, marble angels with spreading wings, weeping willows carved in stone, obelisks reaching toward the sky, and one particularly touching monument of a young girl holding a lamb. Eleanor started with the rose garden. It was located near the oldest section of the cemetery a carefully tended plot with dozens of rose bushes, now trimmed back for winter, but still identifiable by their thorny canes, and the small brass plaques identifying different varieties. Old roses, most of them, with names like Maiden's Blush, Madame Hardy, and Rosamundi. Where the roses bloom eternal, she murmured. She walked through the garden slowly, looking for anything that might be a clue. The roses surrounded a small seating area with a stone bench and were bordered by a low iron fence. At the center of the garden stood a sundial on a stone pedestal, its brass face green with age. Eleanor examined it closely, running her fingers along the base, but found nothing unusual. She moved on to explore the monuments. "Count the stones from the angel's feet," the note had said. There were several angel monuments in the cemetery. Eleanor visited each one, photographing them, noting their locations. One large marble angel stood with arms outstretched, guarding the Whitmore family plot. Another, more modest angel knelt in prayer above the grave of a child who died in 1912. A third angel, wings folded, marked the graves of the Blackwood family. Blackwood, Eleanor's breath caught. That was the name she'd seen on one of the checkout lists. M. Blackwood. She approached the monument more carefully. It was an impressive piece, at least 8 feet tall, carved from white marble that had weathered to a soft gray. The angel's face was serene, almost smiling, and at its feet were carved rose blooms. The family plot contained several graves, the dates ranging from 1873 to 1968. Eleanor counted the gravestones spreading out from the angel's base. 12 in total, arranged in 3 rows, 3 generations, perhaps. She knelt down to read the inscriptions. The oldest graves belonged to Marcus Blackwood, born 1841, died 1923, and his wife Prudence, born 1846, died 1918. Their children's graves were nearby, 2 daughters and a son. The son, Isaiah Blackwood, had married and had children of his own, and those graves formed the 3rd generation. But it was the smallest, simplest stone that caught Eleanor's attention. At the very edge of the Blackwood plot, almost tucked away as if an afterthought, was a small marble marker carved with a lamb. The inscription read, "Margaret Blackwood, beloved daughter and sister, 1897 to 1915. Too pure for earth, an angel returned home. The secret sleeps beneath the marble lamb," Eleanor whispered. Margaret Blackwood. Who was she? And what secret did her grave hold? Eleanor spent another hour in the cemetery, taking notes, photographing various monuments, and thinking. As the afternoon light began to fade and the air grew colder, she finally packed up her things and headed home. She had more research to do, and she had a feeling that the library's local history collection would hold some answers. That evening, Eleanor sat in her cottage with Dickens curled on her lap and Austen purring beside her, laptop open on her coffee table. She searched for information about the Blackwood family, about Margaret Blackwood specifically, but found little online. The Blackwoods had been prominent in Willowbrook's early days. Marcus Blackwood had owned a successful textile mill, but beyond that, information was scarce. On Monday morning, Eleanor arrived at the library early and went straight to the local history room, a small climate-controlled space that housed the library's collection of historical documents, old newspapers on microfilm, city directories, and genealogical resources. She pulled out the Willowbrook Historical Society's published family histories and began to read about the Blackwoods. Marcus and Prudence Blackwood had been pillars of the community. They donated generously to local causes, helped establish the town's first school, and were founding members of the Presbyterian Church. They'd had 3 children: Clara, born 1870, Isaiah, born 1874, and Margaret, born 1897. That birth date struck Eleanor immediately. Margaret was 23 years younger than Isaiah, 27 years younger than Clara. In an era when families typically had children closer together, this was unusual. She read on, searching for any mention of Margaret in the historical records, but found surprisingly little. She appeared in the 1897 birth records, and then there was her death notice in 1915, but nothing in between. No mentions in society pages, no records of school attendance, nothing. Eleanor switched to the old newspaper archives on microfilm, carefully scrolling through editions of the Willowbrook Gazette from 1915. In the October 9th edition, she found Margaret's obituary. It was brief, almost impersonal. Margaret Blackwood, age 18, passed away peacefully on October 7th at the family home. Services will be private. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Willowbrook Children's Home. 18 years old, Eleanor sat back, troubled. Margaret Blackwood had lived 18 years, but seemed to have left almost no trace in the historical record. Why? What was the secret that supposedly slept beneath her marble lamp? And who was M. Blackwood, who checked out library books recently? A descendant, perhaps. Eleanor was so absorbed in her research that she didn't hear the library's front doors open. She didn't notice the soft footsteps approaching the local history room. She only looked up when a gentle voice said, "You found the notes." Eleanor startled, turning to find a young woman standing in the doorway. She was petite, with straight black hair pulled back in a ponytail, dark eyes, and a nervous smile. She wore jeans, a green jacket, and carried a worn messenger bag. "Sarah Chen," Eleanor said, though it wasn't really a question. The young woman nodded. "I'm sorry for being so mysterious. I wasn't sure how else to do this. Can we talk?" Eleanor gestured to the chair beside her. "Please, I have so many questions." Sarah sat down, setting her bag at her feet. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. "My grandmother is Mary Blackwood. She's 92 years old. She married into the Blackwood family in 1954, married Margaret's nephew, Thomas. But Margaret died long before my grandmother arrived in Willowbrook. Still, my grandmother has always felt a connection to Margaret's story because of something she found when she and Thomas moved into the old Blackwood house." Eleanor leaned forward, completely captivated. Sarah continued. "In the attic, packed away in an old trunk, my grandmother found a collection of notebooks. Journals, really. They'd been written by Margaret Blackwood between 1912 and 1915. My grandmother read them, and she said they were beautiful, heartbreaking, and completely changed how she understood the Blackwood family history." "What did the journal say?" Eleanor asked softly. "Margaret was brilliant," Sarah said, and there was admiration in her voice. "Absolutely brilliant. She taught herself multiple languages. She read voraciously. She wrote poetry and essays. She studied mathematics and science. She had this incredible, curious, expansive mind. But she was also disabled. She'd been born with a condition that affected her legs and spine. In that era, in a small town like this, a disabled child from even a wealthy family was often hidden away. That's what happened to Margaret. Her parents loved her, from what the journals suggest, but they kept her at home. She was tutored privately, never went to school, rarely appeared in public. She was essentially erased from Willowbrook's social life. Eleanor felt a wave of sadness. How terrible. Journals show this amazing person, Sarah said. Someone who wanted to learn, to contribute, to be part of the world, but who was confined by the limitations others placed on her because of her disability. She wrote about feeling invisible, about watching life happen beyond her window. But she also wrote about books. Books were her window to the world. She had a huge personal library. Her father would order books for her from Boston and New York. She read everything she could get her hands on. And when she died, Eleanor asked gently, complications from her condition, probably. The obituary said she passed peacefully, but the journals stop a few months before her death, so we don't know her final thoughts. After Margaret died, the family seemed to want to forget about her, or at least not speak of her. My grandmother thinks it was shame, maybe, or grief they didn't know how to process. Margaret's belongings were packed away. Her journals ended up in that trunk in the attic, and she became this almost forgotten figure in family history. Until your grandmother found the journals, Eleanor said. Sarah nodded. My grandmother wanted to honor Margaret's memory somehow. She wanted people to know that Margaret existed, that she mattered, that she had this incredible mind and spirit. But she's elderly now, and she's not comfortable with technology or social media or any modern way of sharing a story. So I offered to help. The notes, Eleanor said, understanding dawning. I'm writing a master's thesis on hidden women's voices in early 20th century America, Sarah explained. Margaret's journals are a perfect example. I'm including her story in my work, but I also wanted to do something more immediate, something that might capture people's imaginations right here in Willowbrook. I thought if I left mysterious clues in library books, eventually someone curious would follow them. Someone who loved books the way Margaret did. Someone who would care about her story. Why so cryptic? Eleanor asked. Why not just tell people about her directly? Sarah smiled a little sheepishly. Because mystery captures attention in a way that straightforward information doesn't. I wanted someone to be curious, to search, to piece things together. I wanted Margaret's rediscovery to be an adventure, the kind of adventure she wrote about wanting to have in her journals. Does that make sense? Eleanor found herself smiling back. It makes perfect sense. So the answer that's hidden where the roses bloom eternal, what is it? Come with me, Sarah said, standing up. If you have time, I'd like to show you. They drove together to Evergreen Cemetery in Sarah's grandmother's car, a vintage Buick that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The day was gray, but not unpleasant. The kind of weather that made colors look muted and soft. They parked and walked through the cemetery gates together, Sarah leading the way with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey many times before. They walked past the rose garden, past the Whitmore Angel, directly to the Blackwood family plot. Sarah stopped at Margaret's small grave with its marble lamb. When you stand here, she said, and look back toward the rose garden, you can count 12 steps. Margaret's window in the Blackwood house looked out over this cemetery. She could see the rose garden from her bedroom. In her journals, she wrote about watching the roses bloom every summer. She called them her eternal roses because they returned year after year, faithful and beautiful. She couldn't walk in the garden herself, but she could see it, and that brought her joy. Eleanor stood beside the small gravestone, looking back toward the rose garden, and felt tears prickling her eyes. My grandmother planted a rose bush here last spring, Sarah continued. It's small now, barely visible, but it's a type of rose that Margaret mentioned often in her journals, her favorite. In a few years, it will bloom here every summer, right by her grave. Roses that bloom eternal, just like she wrote about. They stood in silence for a moment, paying respect to a young woman who'd lived more than a century ago, but whose story still resonated. There's more, Sarah said quietly. That last note you found about midnight revealing the truth, that's actually the most important one. What happens at midnight? Eleanor asked. Not midnight literally, Sarah explained. Midnight is the name of Margaret's journal. She titled it Midnight Thoughts because she often wrote late at night when the house was quiet and she felt most free to express herself. The truth is in those pages. Her truth, her voice, her story. And my grandmother wants to donate the journals to the library. Eleanor turned to look at Sarah, surprised. Grandmother believes that Margaret's journals belong in a public place, Sarah said. Somewhere people can read them, learn from them, be inspired by them. She's been waiting to find the right person to entrust them to. Someone who would care about Margaret's story, who would understand its value. Someone who loves books and mysteries and hidden histories. When I suggested the notes in library books, my grandmother thought it was perfect. She said the right person would find the clues and follow them. And here you are. Eleanor didn't quite know what to say. She felt honored and humbled and deeply moved all at once. Over the following weeks, Eleanor and Sarah worked together to prepare Margaret's journals for the library's collection. Sarah's grandmother, Mary Blackwood, came to the library one afternoon. A tiny woman with snow-white hair and bright, sharp eyes. She carried the journals in a beautiful wooden box that had been crafted by her late husband. Margaret would have loved libraries, Mary said softly, handing the box to Eleanor. She would have loved the idea of people gathering to read, to learn, to discover. Please take good care of her words. I will, Eleanor promised. I absolutely will. The library hosted a small event to unveil the Margaret Blackwood collection. They invited local historians, genealogists, and community members. Sarah gave a presentation about Margaret's life and the historical context of disability in early 20th century America. Eleanor displayed the journals in a locked case in the local history room, along with photographs of Margaret's grave, the rose garden, and the old Blackwood house. But the most touching moment came when Eleanor read aloud from one of Margaret's entries, dated June 15th, 1914. Margaret had written, "Today I read a book about a girl who traveled the world, who climbed mountains and sailed across oceans and danced under foreign stars. I will never do these things with my body, but I do them with my mind every single day. Books are my legs, my wings, my ship. They carry me everywhere. If I have learned anything in my 18 years, it is this. We are all so much more than what others see. We are the books we read, the thoughts we think, the dreams we dream. And those things can never be confined." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. In the months that followed, the Margaret Blackwood collection became one of the library's most requested items. Researchers came to study the journals. Students wrote papers about them. A local playwright even began working on a one-woman show based on Margaret's writings. Sarah's thesis, which featured Margaret prominently, earned her highest honors, and she was accepted into a prestigious doctoral program. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was simpler and quieter. The library started a program called Midnight Readers, a book club for people who felt marginalized or overlooked, who saw themselves in Margaret's story of being brilliant but invisible. They met once a month, discussing books, yes, but also sharing their own stories, supporting each other, creating community. Eleanor, of course, continued as head librarian, but she felt renewed in her purpose. She'd been reminded that libraries aren't just buildings full of books. They're places where stories are preserved, where voices that might otherwise be lost are heard, where mysteries are solved and histories are uncovered. Every book holds potential secrets. Every returned item might contain a message waiting to be discovered. On quiet evenings, when Eleanor was the last person in the library, shelving returned books in the peaceful silence, she sometimes thought about Margaret Blackwood sitting at her window more than a century ago, watching the roses bloom, reading by lamplight, writing her midnight thoughts. She thought about how a young woman who'd felt invisible had reached across more than 100 years through the simple medium of written words, how her story had been hidden but not lost, forgotten but not gone, waiting patiently for someone to care enough to look. And Eleanor thought about Sarah Chen's creative decision to leave mysterious notes in library books, breadcrumbs leading to a beautiful truth. It reminded her that sometimes the best way to honor a story is to make its discovery an adventure, to invite others to be curious, to seek, to solve, to care. The last note Sarah had left, the one Eleanor found tucked into that book of Robert Frost poems, had been the simplest of all. Just 4 words that had seemed cryptic at first, but now felt like a perfect truth. Midnight reveals the truth. It did. Margaret's midnight thoughts had revealed the truth of her brilliant, confined, hopeful, heartbreaking, beautiful life. They'd revealed the truth that every person has value. Every voice deserves to be heard. Every story matters. As autumn deepened into winter that year, Eleanor made a habit of visiting Margaret's grave once a month. She'd stand there for a few quiet minutes, looking back toward the rose garden that Margaret had loved from her window. She'd think about the young woman buried beneath the marble lamb, the woman who'd written that books were her wings, and Eleanor would silently promise to keep being what she'd always been, a guardian of stories, a keeper of histories, a librarian who understood that sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that help us remember those who have been forgotten. The roses, of course, weren't blooming, was winter, but Eleanor knew they would return in spring, just as they had for more than a century. Eternal roses for an eternal truth. Stories matter, voices matter, people matter, even and especially those whom the world tried to overlook. And in the Willowbrook Public Library, in a temperature-controlled room behind a locked glass case, Margaret Blackwood's journals sat waiting for the next reader, the next curious mind, the next person who needed to know that they too could travel worlds without leaving their chair, that they too had value beyond what others could see, that they too could leave words behind that would matter long after they were gone. Eleanor returned to the library as evening fell, unlocked the doors, and stepped into the warm, book-scented space that was her second home. Tomorrow would bring new patrons, new questions, new books to shelve and stories to share. But tonight, in this quiet moment, she felt grateful for mysteries both solved and ongoing, for messages hidden in books, for roses that bloom eternal, and for a midnight voice that had finally been heard. She turned off the lights one by one, checking each section as she always did, making sure everything was in order. As she locked the front doors and walked to her car under a sky full of stars, Eleanor smiled. She was already looking forward to tomorrow, to the next book returned, to the next mystery that might be waiting between its pages. Because if 15 years as a librarian had taught her anything, it was this: in a library, anything is possible. Every book holds a world. And sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones that have been waiting the longest to be told. Eleanor drove home through the quiet streets of Willowbrook, past the warm lights glowing in windows, past the town square with its decorated lampposts, past the cafe that was just closing for the evening. Her cottage welcomed her with the eager meows of Dickens and Austen, who wound around her ankles as she hung up her burgundy cardigan and put the kettle on for tea. That night, as she sat in her favorite armchair with a cup of chamomile steaming on the side table and a book open in her lap, Eleanor found her mind wandering back through the past few months. The discovery of the notes, the cemetery visits, meeting Sarah and her grandmother, unveiling Margaret's journals. It had been, without question, the most extraordinary autumn of her life. And it had all started with a single slip of paper falling from a returned library book. She thought about the other notes she'd found, the ones she'd tucked carefully into an envelope and kept in her desk drawer. She'd read them so many times that she had them memorized now. Each one had been a breadcrumb leading her closer to understanding, closer to Margaret's story. Each one had been carefully crafted by Sarah to invoke curiosity, to inspire searching, to create a sense of mystery and meaning. Eleanor had asked Sarah, during one of their many conversations while preparing the collection, why she'd chosen those particular books to hide the notes in. Sarah's answer had been thoughtful. "I tried to choose books that Margaret mentioned in her journals," she'd explained. She loved Agatha Christie. She read extensively about gardening, even though she couldn't garden herself. She studied local history. She treasured poetry, especially Frost. Each book I chose was a small homage to her interests, her passions, the things that made her who she was. It was such a loving gesture, Eleanor thought now, sipping her tea. Sarah had honored her great-great-aunt not just by sharing her story, but by sharing it in a way that reflected Margaret's own love of books and learning. The mystery itself had been a kind of memorial, a treasure hunt that led not to gold or jewels, but to something far more valuable, a human life remembered, a voice restored. As winter settled over Willowbrook in earnest, the library became a haven for people seeking warmth and comfort. Eleanor noticed that more people were checking out books from the local history collection, asking questions about the town's past, wanting to know more about the founding families. Margaret's story had sparked a broader interest in hidden histories, in the people who'd been overlooked or forgotten. A high school history teacher, Mr. Hendricks, approached Eleanor one snowy December afternoon with an idea. He wanted his students to do a project researching other forgotten figures from Willowbrook's past. Were there other people whose stories deserved to be told? Other voices that had been silenced or overlooked? Eleanor thought it was a wonderful idea and offered to help the students with their research. Over the following months, those students uncovered remarkable stories. They found a Chinese immigrant who'd worked on the railroad and later became a successful merchant, but whose contributions had been omitted from official town histories. They discovered a Black woman who'd been a midwife and healer in the 1800s, trusted and respected by many, but never formally recognized. They learned about a group of women who'd run a secret lending library during the Depression, keeping literature alive and accessible when the official library had been forced to close for lack of funding. Each discovery felt like finding another hidden note, another mystery solved, another story rescued from obscurity. And Eleanor, in her quiet way, facilitated all of it. She taught the students how to use the archives, how to search through old newspapers, how to piece together fragments of information into coherent narratives. She watched them become excited about history in a way that textbooks had never inspired, because these were real people, people who'd walked the same streets they walked, people whose choices and challenges and triumphs felt immediate and relevant. The students created a digital archive of their findings, and the library hosted it on their website. They also created physical displays that rotated through the library's exhibition space. and they credited Margaret Blackwood's story as their inspiration. If we hadn't learned about her, one student wrote in the project introduction, we might never have thought to look for others like her. She taught us that every person's story matters, even if it's been forgotten. She taught us to look closer, to ask questions, to care about the past, because it shapes who we are now. Spring came late that year, arriving tentatively in early April, with crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow and trees beginning to show the faintest green haze of new leaves. Eleanor found herself thinking often about the roses in the cemetery, wondering when they would bloom, knowing that this year they would have special significance. On a Saturday morning in late May, Sarah called Eleanor. "The roses are blooming," she said simply. "Would you like to go see them?" They met at the cemetery gates at 10 o'clock on a morning so beautiful it felt like a gift. The sky was cloudless and deeply blue. The air smelled of fresh grass and flowering trees. Birds sang from every branch. And in the historic rose garden at Evergreen Cemetery, the old roses were indeed blooming. Dozens of bushes covered in flowers of pink and white and deep crimson, their perfume heavy and sweet on the warm air. Eleanor and Sarah walked through the garden slowly, reading the brass plaques, admiring the different varieties. Some of the roses were single-petaled and simple. Others were elaborate and ruffled. Some were pale as moonlight, others vibrant as sunset. All of them were beautiful, and all of them had returned, just as they did every year, faithful as the seasons. Then they walked to Margaret's grave, and Sarah knelt down beside the small marble lamb. There, just as she'd promised, was the rosebush Mary Blackwood had planted the previous spring. It was still small, but it was thriving, and it bore 3 perfect blooms, pale pink with a darker pink center, each flower no bigger than a teacup, but exquisite in its delicate beauty. "Margaret's favorite," Sarah said softly, touching one of the petals with gentle fingers. "It's called Maiden's Blush. She wrote about it often. She said it was the color of hope." Eleanor knelt beside Sarah, looking at those 3 small roses blooming beside a grave that was more than a century old. And she felt something shift in her heart, a sense of completion and connection that was difficult to name but impossible to deny. Here was the culmination of the mystery that had begun with a note in a library book. Here were the eternal roses, blooming faithfully, bearing witness that Margaret Blackwood had lived, had mattered, and was remembered. They stayed for a while, just sitting on the grass beside the grave, not talking much, just being present. Sarah told Eleanor that her grandmother's health was declining, but that Mary was at peace. She'd accomplished what she'd wanted to accomplish, ensuring that Margaret's story was preserved and shared, giving her forgotten sister-in-law the recognition and honor she deserved. My grandmother says she'll rest easier knowing that Margaret isn't alone anymore, Sarah said. For so many years, Margaret was this secret that the family didn't talk about. But now, her story is out in the world. Now people know her name. Now she matters to people beyond just our family. Eleanor reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. You gave her that gift, she said. You and your grandmother both. You made sure she wasn't forgotten. We couldn't have done it without you, Sarah replied. You were the one who found the notes and cared enough to follow them. You were the one who understood what we were trying to do. You were the perfect person to find Margaret's story, because you're exactly the kind of person Margaret would have wanted to find it. Someone who loves books and mysteries and history. Someone who believes that stories matter. They stood eventually brushing grass from their clothes and walked back through the cemetery together. Before they left, Eleanor turned back one more time to look at the Blackwood family plot, at the angel with its serene face, at the small grave with its marble lamb, and its 3 pink roses, and she made a silent promise to Margaret Blackwood that she would continue to honor her memory, continue to share her story, continue to remind people that every voice matters, every life has value, every person deserves to be remembered. The Midnight Readers Book Club continued to meet monthly at the library, and it grew steadily. What had started as a small group of 6 or 7 people expanded to nearly 20 regular members. They read diverse books, from classics to contemporary fiction, from memoirs to poetry. But more importantly, they created a space where people felt seen and heard, where being different or overlooked or marginalized was not a source of shame, but a source of strength and solidarity. Eleanor often opened their meetings by reading a passage from Margaret's journals, something relevant to whatever book they were discussing, or whatever theme seemed to be emerging in their conversation. The journals had become a kind of touchstone for the group, a reminder of why they gathered, what they stood for, who they were honoring with their attention to voices that might otherwise go unheard. One evening in July, the book club met to discuss a contemporary novel about disability and identity. After their discussion, one of the members, a young man named David who had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair, spoke up. I want to thank whoever started this group, he said. I've lived in Willowbrook my whole life, and I've often felt invisible here, like people don't quite know what to do with me or how to include me. But this group, this space, it's different. Here I feel like I matter. Here my voice counts. And it's all because someone more than 100 years ago wrote about feeling the same way. And someone today cared enough to share her story. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, Eleanor's included. Later, as she was locking up the library, she thought about David's words. This was why libraries mattered. This was why stories mattered. This was why Eleanor had spent 15 years and would gladly spend 15 more doing this work. Because books built bridges across time and space and circumstance. Because words had power to connect, to heal, to illuminate, to change. As summer ripened into August, Eleanor received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a publisher in Boston who had heard about the Margaret Blackwood collection and was interested in publishing a selection of Margaret's journals along with historical context and photographs. They wanted to make Margaret's story accessible to a wider audience, to ensure that her voice reached beyond Willowbrook. Eleanor immediately called Sarah, who was thrilled. They arranged a meeting with the publisher along with Mary Blackwood, who despite her declining health was sharp as ever and had very specific ideas about how Margaret's journals should be presented. The publisher was respectful and enthusiastic, and by September, a contract had been signed. The book, titled Midnight Thoughts, The Lost Journals of Margaret Blackwood, would be published the following spring. Sarah would write the introduction and provide historical context. Mary would contribute a foreword about finding the journals and why she'd wanted to share them. And Eleanor would write an afterword about the mystery of the hidden notes and how Margaret's story had been rediscovered. As Eleanor sat at her desk in her cottage one autumn evening, working on her afterword, she found herself struggling to capture the fullness of what the past year had meant. How could she convey the magic of finding that first note, the excitement of piecing together clues, the profound moment of understanding when she'd stood at Margaret's grave and realized the depth of one young woman's quiet courage? She wrote and deleted, until finally she stopped trying to explain and simply told the truth. She wrote about her love of libraries, her belief that books hold secrets and connections and possibilities. She wrote about the ordinary Tuesday evening when a note fell from a returned book and changed everything. She wrote about following breadcrumbs through a mystery that led not to treasure, but to something more valuable. A reminder that every person's story matters, that voices silenced in one era can still speak to another, that sometimes the most profound discoveries are the ones that help us see the humanity in people we never knew existed. She ended her afterword with a passage from one of Margaret's final journal entries, written in July of 1915, just 3 months before her death. Margaret had written, "I have been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. I will leave no children, no great accomplishments visible to the world. But I will leave these pages, these thoughts, these words that have kept me company through lonely years. If someday, somehow, someone reads these words and feels less alone because of them, If someone understands that they too can create beauty and meaning within whatever limitations they face, then my life will have mattered. That is enough. That is more than enough. Eleanor read those words again after she'd typed them into her document, and she felt tears on her cheeks. "Your life did matter, Margaret," she whispered to the empty room. "You have reached across more than a century, and you have touched so many hearts. You are not forgotten. You never will be again." The book was published the following April, just as the roses were beginning to bloom again in Evergreen Cemetery. The launch event was held at the Willowbrook Public Library, naturally, and the turnout was extraordinary. Every seat was filled, people stood along the walls, and the local newspaper sent a reporter. Mary Blackwood, now 93 and frail, but determined, attended in her wheelchair, her eyes bright with satisfaction as she watched people line up to purchase copies of her sister-in-law's journals. The book received wonderful reviews. Critics praised Margaret's eloquent prose, her keen observations, her courage and resilience. One reviewer wrote, "Margaret Blackwood's journals are a testament to the power of the human spirit and the importance of literature in sustaining hope. These are the writings of a remarkable mind that deserved to be recognized in her own time and deserves our attention now." The book sold well beyond anyone's expectations. It was taught in college courses on women's history and disability studies. It was discussed on book club podcasts and featured in literary magazines. Rights were sold for translations into several languages. And perhaps most meaningfully, Eleanor began receiving letters at the library from readers around the world who wanted to share how Margaret's story had affected them. One letter came from a woman in her 60s who had been caring for her adult daughter with severe disabilities. She wrote, "Reading Margaret's journals helped me see my daughter differently. I've been so focused on what she can't do that I sometimes forget to honor who she is, the richness of her inner life, the ways she experiences beauty and joy that are different from mine, but no less real. Thank you for sharing Margaret's voice. It has changed how I see my own daughter." Another letter came from a young man who had recently become paralyzed in an accident. He wrote, "I was drowning in self-pity and anger, feeling like my life was over. Then I read about Margaret Blackwood, who lived more than 100 years ago with limited mobility, and yet who created this extraordinary legacy of thought and beauty. If she could find meaning and purpose in her life, then maybe I can too. She gave me hope when I desperately needed it." Eleanor read every letter that came, and she answered each one personally. She kept copies of them in a special folder that she stored in the local history room, alongside Margaret's original journals. These letters were part of Margaret's story too, part of her ongoing legacy, proof that words written in loneliness more than a century ago were still creating connection and understanding today. Sarah successfully completed her doctorate and accepted a position as a professor of history at a university in Vermont. But she remained close to Eleanor, visiting Willowbrook regularly and always stopping by the library when she was in town. They'd become genuine friends, bonded by their shared love of history and mysteries, and the profound experience of bringing Margaret's story to light. Mary Blackwood passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm night in June, 2 months after the book's publication. She'd lived to see Margaret honored and remembered, which was all she'd wanted. At her funeral, Sarah read from Margaret's journals, and Eleanor spoke about Mary's determination to ensure that her forgotten sister-in-law's voice was heard. They buried Mary in the Blackwood family plot, not far from Margaret's grave with its marble lamb and its blooming roses. The years that followed were good ones for Eleanor. She continued as head librarian, watching the Willowbrook Public Library thrive and grow. The Margaret Blackwood collection remained one of their most popular exhibits, and school groups regularly came to learn about her story. The Midnight Readers Book Club continued to meet and expand, becoming a model that other libraries around the state began to replicate. But perhaps the most beautiful development came 3 years after the book's publication, when the town council voted to name the library's garden after Margaret Blackwood. The library had a small outdoor space that had been used primarily for storage and had fallen into neglect. With donations from community members and a generous grant from a foundation that supported disability awareness, the space was transformed into a beautiful, accessible garden with wide, smooth paths, raised beds, comfortable benches, and of course, roses. Many roses, including a large planting of maiden's blush, Margaret's favorite, pale pink and sweetly scented. At the garden's dedication ceremony, Eleanor stood before a crowd of people and spoke about Margaret Blackwood, about her love of roses that she could see but not touch, about her brilliant mind and generous heart, about her legacy that had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined when she wrote in her journals by lamplight. And Eleanor spoke about the power of libraries to preserve stories, to honor voices, to ensure that no one is truly forgotten. A bronze plaque was mounted at the garden's entrance. It read, "The Margaret Blackwood Memorial Garden, in honor of a brilliant mind, a courageous spirit, and a reminder that every voice matters. Dedicated April 2029. Eleanor often took her lunch breaks in the Margaret Blackwood Memorial Garden, sitting on one of the benches with a sandwich and a book, surrounded by flowers, and the gentle sound of a small fountain that had been installed in the center of the space. Sometimes library patrons would join her, and they'd chat about books or weather or the beauty of the roses. Sometimes she sat alone, reading and thinking, and feeling grateful for the mysterious journey that had led her to this place. On quiet afternoons, when the light slanted golden through the garden and the roses filled the air with their perfume, Eleanor sometimes felt as if Margaret Blackwood was there with her, not as a ghost, but as a presence, a reminder, a continuing inspiration. She imagined Margaret would have loved this garden, would have loved knowing that her story had created this beautiful, accessible space where people could gather and rest and read and simply be. And she thought about those mysterious notes that Sarah had hidden in library books so long ago now, those breadcrumbs that had led Eleanor on the adventure of a lifetime. She thought about how a simple slip of paper with elegant handwriting and a cryptic message had opened up an entire world of discovery and meaning. She thought about how the smallest gesture, the quietest voice, the most hidden story could still change everything if someone cared enough to listen. Eleanor was approaching 60 now, and she'd begun to think about eventual retirement, though the thought of leaving the library made her heart ache. But she knew that when the time came, she would leave behind something important. She would leave behind Margaret's story, preserved and celebrated. She would leave behind a thriving midnight readers community. She would leave behind a beautiful garden bearing Margaret's name. And she would leave behind the knowledge, taught to countless patrons over decades, that libraries are magical places where mysteries are solved and forgotten voices are heard. And ordinary evenings can become extraordinary adventures if you're paying attention to what's hidden in the returned books. As the sun set over Willowbrook on this particular evening, Eleanor closed her book, stood from the garden bench, and walked back into the library to finish her day's work. Tomorrow would bring new patrons with new questions, new books to shelve and stories to share. But tonight, she felt deeply satisfied, knowing that she had honored her calling, that she had made a difference, that she had helped ensure that Margaret Blackwood, who had once written that she felt invisible, was now seen and remembered and celebrated. The roses would bloom again next spring. The library would continue to serve its community. Margaret's journals would continue to inspire readers around the world. And somewhere, perhaps, another mysterious note would be tucked into another library book, waiting for another curious soul to find it and follow where it led. Because that's what libraries do. They preserve mysteries and reveal them. They hide treasures and guide seekers to find them. They honor the past while serving the present. They remind us that every person's story matters, that no voice should be silenced or forgotten, that words written in loneliness can create connection across vast distances of time and circumstance. Eleanor turned off the lights in the Margaret Blackwood Memorial Garden, watching the solar lanterns click on automatically to illuminate the paths for anyone who might visit after dark. She locked the library's doors, walked to her car under a sky beginning to fill with stars, and drove home to her cottage where Dickens and Austen were waiting, and in the cemetery on the hill above town, beside a small gravestone marked with a marble lamb. Pale pink roses bloomed in the gathering darkness, faithful as always, eternal as the story they represented, beautiful beyond words. Rest well tonight, dear listener. May you dream of mysteries solved and voices heard. May you remember that your own story matters, that your own voice deserves to be spoken, that you too can create beauty and meaning within whatever circumstances you face. And may you always know that somewhere, in a library or a garden or a quiet corner of the world, someone is working to ensure that no story is truly lost, that no person is forgotten, that every life is honored and remembered. Sleep peacefully now. The midnight thoughts have been shared. The truth has been revealed. The roses bloom eternal, and all is well. Good night.